Go Terry. Go Terry. Hey. Terry, how are you doing on this very fine Tuesday?
I'm actually pretty good. I mean, I was up late. Those of you who know me know why. I'm a Titans fan, so I was up late, but it ended well. So I was very happy.
All right. So Terry's in a good mood. We like that. In a little bit, we're going to be diving into our planned topic for this morning, broadly entitled Making Workbooks Work. But more specifically, just kind of considering both a little bit of the history of formal class production and material. That is, like, you go out and buy a workbook, you buy into a series, you buy into a format, but also even just the more micro level of looking at an individual workbook and an individual lesson within a workbook and working within that constraint to build a good Bible class. And each class has its own kind of step-to-step process that I use for that. Terry will talk about his, and hopefully we'll get a number of participants as well who can come in with questions, comments, as always. But before we dive into that wonderful subject, before we get deeper into those weeds, I've got a question for Terry because I know this is right in his space. And I think it's important because we know a lot of dads making this transition in their lives. For those new fathers who are ready to step into the next level of their experience, what is the go-to New Balance tennis shoe for them to wear at all events? Like, if I could only have one pair of New Balances, what would that shoe be? I feel like this is a Terry question that he's been training for his entire life.
Well, I don't remember it right off the bat, so I'm having to look those numbers up. But I can't
Like a
remember what my pair
604,
are.
a 605,
Yeah,
those are whites with the blue labels.
it's got to go. So you got to go crispy white with the blue trim. I know. Here's the deal. I think it's 608 is what I have. And you have to go. So with just to be clear with everybody, in Nike they're the Monarchs. That's the name of them. But there's a 5740, but there's also the 604 is actually what I went. I think it's 604. It has a stabilization piece on the back that actually gives you a firmer ability. 624 maybe is the number. It's 600s. It's a good shoe. I've got a pair. I've got the crispy whites. They got to be in white. They got to be in white with blue trim. There's no doubt about that. Okay. And you got to mow your yard. Hal Hammonds is saying, check me for golf balls. There it is. Those of you that might have seen my story.
Nice colorway.
I got one of my high school kids brought me a golf ball in class Sunday morning. Yeah.
Second place finish.
Yeah.
And here's the thing with that quintessential step for new dads, for potential first-time homeowner mowers. Those 600 series, which is like, and Chris Kramer's talking about the 410s, which is
that's not the dad shoe.
So the dad shoe, that's a great shoe.
But not the dad shoe.
This is a shoe that is suitable for many occasions. It's good for the lawn. It'll be good for sideline use, coaching or witnessing your kids' sports endeavors.
Also great.
Wear it out to
the Grill Master 3000s is also what we call them.
Yeah. Right. Standing beside the flame in order to produce and provide a good meal for your family. I think there's a lot of space to explore there. So this episode is brought to you by 600s.
Yeah, here's a question for you, by the way. Another dad question. Tongs at the grill. How many test clicks do you do?
At least two.
I'm a three clicker.
It really depends.
I'm a three clicker. The test clicks are click, click, click. That's me. 3 clicks.
Yeah. That's usually my standard click. I just want to make sure they're functioning properly. There's no impediment to their grab.
You got to make sure that they're bent the right way to touch correctly, or yeah. I had a pair one time that one was bent more than the other, didn't work well. So you got to test the clicks.
And I've shifted to the scissor style, and so I've got dual handle in the back with good, basically spatula sized claws under there, so I can turn them on the side and get underneath those softer productions, like some of the softer burgers and even some chicken and stuff, and kind of lift them up there and then gently caress them on the top as I elevate them from the grill into their secure space. Like I'm pretty.
I just have a regular old
serious thing.
I got a nice solid stainless steel spatula I use for burgers and steaks and stuff. Really good, nice little neoprene handle, I think, rubber handle. It's really nice, really good, really well made. Mm-hmm. And then of course on the Blackstone, I got the 2 Blackstone flat spatulas. Because you gotta spread and scoop and spread and scoop and spread and scoop on the flat top. So, yeah.
Right. Absolutely true. I think those are some good tie-in questions because you got to make that look work. And I want to correct this for anybody who misunderstands. It actually does matter what shoes you wear when you mow.
Yeah. Is this where I don't mow my yard anymore?
The neighbors are looking at your yard, but they also are looking at you when you mow.
But I don't mow my yard, but I still do some yard work. And when I do yard work, I have to slap on the white crispy boys. We have to put them on because that's how Dad rolls.
That's how it works. Let's get to the heart of the matter. I'm sure we've distracted enough people. We're now Googling New Balance shoes and 600s and 410s.
We should do a whole episode on how to be a dad. I mean, we would
need someone who's a good dad. I kid.
I'm right here.
You're a caricature of a dad. You're someone's cartoon drawing.
My kids would agree with you.
You're basically at the fair and someone's exaggerated every single feature. All right.
Except for my head. Yeah, well, like my problem is in a caricature, usually your head's bigger than your body. My body's bigger than my head. That's the problem. I'm like a reverse caricature.
I'm talking to Joanne about this.
Yeah.
I think Joanne might have a different answer. So let's get to the heart.
Where's Jill at? I got questions for Jill today, and I know she loves to come on the air.
Yeah, that's never going to happen.
Oh boy,
we're going to talk about workbooks today.
Do the workbook
in a way that I think is do the workbook.
So you need a shirt that you teach with workbooks that says "Do the workbook."
Yeah, do the workbook. So I know Terry's got a few sitting on his table, probably unintentional. Maybe he branded himself by setting them there just in case. Maybe he's actually using them right now. I've got my own little plethora as well. Plus this a little modification that I'll talk about.
This one I wrote.
That's a good workbook.
This one I wrote.
That's a good workbook. Yeah.
Yeah.
The problem is, the question is, does it actually work? I can tell you wrote it because it's not perfect bound; it's spiral bound, which is like a step up.
Dude, spiral bound is better because you can lay it flat. It's so great.
Right.
By the way, just a plug. If your church is still using comb binding, spend the money to get the spiral bound. It holds better. It folds better. It does everything better. I mean, you will be surprised how often you use that thing.
If you're investing in a self-produced workbook with the intent of it being good enough to use, you should be making it good enough to keep. It's whatever your goal is with that product. And Shane Scott wants us to know something important, so I'm going to go ahead and pin that up there for a little bit. Shane wants Terry to know that he's proud of you, Terry, for not writing Revelations. He's quite pleased.
Because there's only one Revelation.
Right.
I pulled more workbooks out.
Right. More of the books that do the book work? Question mark. All right. So let's talk about a couple of things historically speaking first. For those of us who are probably, let's say, 45 and up, that includes Terry and I, roughly. we are familiar with a style of education, not only in the church context, but also very often in primary school, middle school context, and not so much in middle school for me, at least. I don't know about Terry, that a heavy emphasis on, especially early grades, of filling in the blank. That this sentence is missing a key phrase or a key concept, and as an expectation of your learning methodology, you're going to fill in this missing information. I know it still goes on. It's very common in certain spaces of academic work all the way through high school, where study guides are written in the same way, where, hey, you're going to fill in these missing pieces to create the answer that is going to be needed by you on the test. Some brethren seem to do one of two things with that historic practice: either completely and uniformly embrace it, or completely and uniformly reject it. And I'll tell you that I think my opinion has kind of shifted a little bit, where I'm kind of there's value in both. It really depends on the context of your audience and the context of the method of instruction. Because there are times when fill in the blank is definitely the appropriate learning tool. But I think it gets overused or not used is probably, and so that finding that sweet spot's a little difficult. Terry, quick historical review, if you will, or things that you want to identify real quick.
Well, I mean, I was one of those kids that was for a period of time raised on the Truth in Life series, like every kid growing up in the church. And then at some point, my dad actually, when I was growing up, started writing the Bible class material for the whole church. And that changed. It was more thought-based. And so, I've had different levels growing up. But then actually when I was kind of preaching, just started out preaching, we would use different things. But even then, I tried to write my material the most until I went to one group that everybody was using the old Granville Tyler books from like the 1950s, which were, if you've ever done those, you have like 4 fill in the blank. I mean, you have 4 sections: 10 fill in the blank, 10 multiple choice, 10 true, false, and I can't even remember what the last 10 was. And I got to tell you, that was particularly frustrating for me because there was an expectation that you had to answer every question in class. And that's just didn't fit my style when you're like going through 10 true or false questions. And you have to figure out how to make all those things work. I'm not a fan of fill in the blank workbooks. I think I don't know who he got it from, but I remember Bobby Cannon saying he didn't like fill in the blank workbooks because they left the students blank and unfilled. It was either Bobby Cannon or Ken Welliver that said that. I can't remember which one. And I tend to think that same thing. I'd rather ask some questions that make you search a little bit. And if you've ever been in the Granville Tyler workbooks, one of the things that was particularly frustrating for me is like some of the questions were like, how many times is the word grace used in this chapter? And you're kind of like, that's a dumb question. Like, half of those things, by the way, Phil, were just to try to make you go back and reread the text again. That's all the point of that question was.
So here's my quick take on that. And this is kind of where I think that these things can really thrive. Fill in the blank material and prompts to get you to reread a chapter are excellent with early writers. We're talking individuals that are kindergarten to, let's say, all the way up to 3rd grade. I think that might be a kind of a sliding scale, maybe a little later, maybe a little earlier, because their ability to interact in that format is limited. And so if you write a workbook in that space, getting them to be able to write a biblical premise or a word or a key Bible theological principle in a word or two and repeat it over the course of that quarter, is really going to double down on that burgeoning skill. They're emerging into that ability. They're learning how to do that. Some kids will hate it. Some kids will love it. But in the end, it's functional. It actually accomplishes some good. But when you go to 3rd to, say, 6th grade, and now we've shifted that next bracket up, that practice should diminish. where that's no longer what you're trying to accomplish, and you can do more. Those kids can accomplish more. Maybe
I
you don't have as many questions, but you have better questions.
I was teaching the high school class for a large chunk of that time, and I just taught them how to use Bible software with those questions. That was the application, because at that time eSword was free, and I'm like, go download eSword, do a search, do it with certain parameters. It'll tell you exactly the answer to that question. Totally, and because at that time, quite frankly, none of those kids were going to answer it if they had to reread it and count every time. They're just not going to do it. But I taught them a useful skill that hopefully helped them to then branch out and use that Bible software. That was free at the time. Still is, I think, eSword. I'm not sure. I don't use it.
eSword's basic practice stuff is still free.
And the other thing about, like the Granville Tyler books, and I think this is one of the things you've got to understand, like if you want to get the most use out of a workbook, you have to understand there's some nuances attached to those workbooks. For instance, if it is a fill in the blank like Granville Tyler, you have to use the right translation or you won't get the answers, quote unquote, correct. And for the Granville Tyler books, you had to use the King James Version. You had to use the King James Version. No other version would work. Wouldn't match up. You wouldn't find the right words. It was just confusing for especially the younger you got. And so, again, we use that as an opportunity. Okay, you can go use eSword. Here's a free King James Version on your computer. You can go and you can do this. And that's just an example of how you have to approach a workbook overall. That's why you and I prefer to write our own materials, because we know what our intent is. Like we know where we're going next and what we're doing. I have to try to figure that out, and I have to understand the process of how that book is intended to be used. I'll use David Banning's book as a big example of that. David Banning's books for teenagers, I think, are excellent. I use them. I'm using them. In fact, this is interesting. So for my high school class right now, we're doing Revelation using Banning's book. For my adult class, I wrote the material because I changed the order of some things and I've added more stuff. But the biggest complaint people have about Banning's material is really connected to the idea that they don't know how to teach Banning's material. And if you don't know how to actually teach the Get Them Talking series and what the purpose is behind it, it's awful material. You will not like it because you don't understand its intent and its background and its purpose. So like step one to using anybody else's material besides your own is to figure out what they're attempting to do with the book they're writing. So.
Yeah, and I'll add this. That's also step one with your own material.
Yes.
You've got to get a plan. Like you got to know what you want to accomplish. It's not just, okay, we're going to cover 5 verses a week and drill down into the grammar of the English translation I prefer. You got to have some overarching goals that go beyond just even the quarter that you're teaching or the period of time that you've been assigned to teach. So let me add another great, really common workbook to the table, which is different. There's another one that I'll bring up too, which kind of comes forth from 2 corners of self-directed learning or homeschool type concepts, Bible Project and similar type things. But this one is one of Bob and Sandra Waldron's workbook series, which I will tell you on the first level are full of some really good content. Content-wise, Bob and Sandra's material has a lot of good going for it.
They're an affordable commentary.
Right. They are an affordable commentary, marketed as a workbook, and it can be a workbook, but it's not the kind of workbook that is familiar to a large part of the learning audience in churches and the educational audience in churches. And this is my copy of the history and geography of the Bible story that they've got.
That's the coloring book they have. You get to color and draw in there.
Right. And so I took it and I cut the binding apart. I do that for these larger perfect binded books over the years when I'm using them as a format, because then I can slide in extra pages.
Something like this, which is thick and glued and doesn't lay flat and difficult to use, just so those who aren't aware.
And so it solves that part of those problems. It solves now it will lay flat. It solves that I can kind of mark up and tab out things efficiently, put in the standard tab pages, insert my own additional thoughts as needed, because sometimes there isn't a lot of space. So what happens in here, this particular book as an example, is it mixes some of this fill in the blank expectations to justify its status as a workbook, but it also is full of their really rich commentary. That means the teacher has to accept that that's the reality that they're in. This is more of a commentary than it is, especially the larger parts of their series, than a compact workbook. So now you know, okay, that's what's going to happen here. But the problem is, you and I may pick up this workbook and try to teach it, but then we realize I'm not Bob Waldron. Like, I didn't write this. I didn't prepare this. I don't know it's always credited to the two of them. And while I know them, I don't know the distinction between the process. But in the end, I'm not them. So I've got to ask a question. How do I convey this material? That's going to require you to go through pretty much the same steps with any typical workbook. One, identify the goal, identify the process, and then actually lesson plan to meet those goals and use that workbook as part of the process. Fundamentally, it shouldn't be you or the class reading the workbook aloud in the class. But you could, if I asked everyone to raise their hand, literally or digitally, have you ever been in a Bible class where that has been the evolution? And have you seen it occur when you were teaching? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen it occur also as the teacher and as the student. And it's not the intention. I would say that's not the intention of the writers of the material either. That they didn't expect people to get up and read verbatim the workbook and verbatim the questions for the most part. I'm sure
It's
some
Bible
did,
class, right? It's not workbook class. But the problem is sometimes we get that mixed up. And so let's just be, I guess, blunt. A lot of times the reason you read through the workbook is because if you're the teacher, is because you've not done the adequate preparation prior to class to come up with a different way to teach it beyond that. And so I'm going to step up on a small soapbox right now. This should apply to every class that is taught regardless of age. You should sit down, whether you're teaching the 2-year-olds or the adults, and you should have a lesson plan for what you're going to teach and how you're going to teach it. And it should be more than, we'll just open up the book and we'll just start from the beginning and go through the lesson together. Like if that's the totality of your preparation and your plan, that's inadequate. And our students, regardless of age, deserve better than that. They just do. Mm-hmm. I remember Ken Welliver in a teaching workshop one time talked about how one of the issues with the fill in the blank books was that the teacher for the 6th grade class would ride in the back of his van, "Brother, you are boring," and he would do his lesson on the way to church while his wife was driving and roll out of the back of his van and go in and teach the class. But he literally took 10 minutes to prepare because, after all, it was a simple book. It was a kid's class. It didn't need much. And and Chris Kramer talks about a lot of adults that don't have the knowledge of the Bible that many laboriously learned. Where would we be without truth in life? I would tell you there, Chris, that I don't think that's the key. You'd have to quote Ken Welliver with "Brother, you are boring," Daniel, not me, because I'm stealing it. I don't think it's the truth in life that was the key. It's the teacher that's the key. And our big disconnect, and I think that's just a key to this, and that's why we're doing this, is the disconnect we often have is we think the material is the secret sauce. It's not. You as the teacher are the secret sauce. You can take bad material and make a great class out of it. But you focus on the assigned text in the scripture. You don't focus on the class. It's on the book itself. That's the key to all of this. And
I'll give it this way, Terry. So I'm opening up Divided Kingdom, Discovering God's Way. We'll settle, say, on, I don't know, lesson 5, because it's right around here. Lesson 5, the ministry of Elisha, is the topic of it. This is a way to turn any workbook into a functional lesson plan. Any lesson book of any kind has some primary headings. Basically, they've broken down the story into thematic or story form chunks. My suggestion is very simple. Step 1 on the making of your lesson plan, after you figure out your purpose, your goal, your intentions, learn each of these independent stories. Summarize them as stories, because in the Bible they are presented as stories. They're not moralized. They're not outlined. They're essentially stories. And then get yourself to a point where you can generally tell the story. Whether you use notes or not is not a big deal to me. Like, you want to be able to tell each of those stories. So when you get the class, your expectation is that the students spread across their ability zones have read ahead of time, thought ahead of time, maybe just showed up today, maybe were forced to be there today. But it's going to then be the point where you tell them a story. And if you got a kid who wants to step in and tell a story, have them, if they're younger or older, hey, tell me this story. Like, that's a way you can.
And do it age appropriate. Like, so if you're with the 4-year-olds, you might use the felt board to tell the story. And if you're with second grades, kids, you may actually have them act out the story. Give them a script they can read, or third grade, have them act out the story. When you're with sixth grade, have the sixth graders tell you the story from their own perspective, which is also, by the way, not only are they interactive, but you're seeing whether they read their lesson or not, right? So it's age appropriate. That's what you're trying to do. In my Revelation class with my high school kids, we will take every vision and we will draw the visions. The kids will draw the visions. And we'll use those drawings later on. And I got that from David Banning. We use those visions later on as a way to review, but it also helps them learn the story, specifically those visions within the story. And all of that takes good planning. And here's one of my frustrations, by the way, with the way we teach Bible classes. This has to do with workbooks, and it has to do with just teaching. When it comes to lesson planning, you need to understand attention spans and how that works. Men are horrible at this, by the way. We are terrible at this. That's why we go into the high school class and we lecture for 45 minutes and they hate it. So here's a simple mathematic formula to figure out your lesson plans. If you have a class, you take the average age, okay, and you divide that into the amount of time you have. So in the high school class, I have the average age is 15, let's say, and I have 45 minutes. I need to have at least a minimum of 3 different activities as I teach that class that are planned instead of just lecturing them for 45 minutes. And even a discussion for 45 minutes doesn't help. I need to do something different, whether it's a group project, whether it's intentionally playing devil's advocate and setting up a debate. So you need to have this kind of formula in mind. But then we get to the adults, and then it's like, well, the average age is 50, so I only have to have one. I can lecture them the whole time. Look, it's just not working. I mean, I got to tell you, one of the fun things to do for me is to divide the adult class up for 10 minutes into small groups and have them discuss something. It's just this mass chaos of talking. And I don't even care, hey, yeah, there's some of those people that are actually starting to talk about something besides the Bible class material. And I don't get on to them. I just let it go. And we come back and we have a good discussion. And it breaks up the monotony and people respond to that. But that's all part of lesson planning. You've got to, whether it's case studies, whether it's agree, disagree questions, whatever you can do, you've got to break up the monotony of just this standard, boring presentation of this stuff in a way that nobody's listening to you. We live in a generation that is tuning in to 2-minute videos, and if it's longer than that, they move on. They're going to disconnect if we don't operate on the same kind of procedure. Hey, look, there was a time where I laughed at people telling me that one day we'd use video in Bible classes. I use video sometimes in Bible classes, right? Because it breaks up the monotony. You've got to plan that kind of stuff. The point though is, Phil, and this is, I think, part of what we're trying to talk about, that stuff's not going to happen by accident. Like it's not, you're not gonna just fall into a YouTube clip about Revelation if you don't plan it ahead of time. You're not gonna find the God's Chisel skit. That's a great 10-minute skit that everybody I've shown that to is just entrenched in it by the skit guys. You're not gonna, if you use that in a class on, let's say, grace, you're not gonna find that by accident unless you plan on it. It's not gonna happen. You've got to make plans for this kind of stuff. You could do that with any workbook because you're planning outside of the workbook. Don't let the workbook be your lesson plan. That's what I'm saying if you want to be effective.
Right. And the workbook becomes, like Bob pointed out, a source material for you. Well, maybe helping you figure out your structure, which stories are going to matter for this particular class. Here's a couple things. I dropped in my standard outline that I use when I'm preparing pretty much anything I do. And it's a step-by-step process. Make it simple. That's accurate and memorable. Make it SAM. Whatever you do, it needs to eventually reach that goal. Maybe you're going to tell the story a couple times, maybe a third time where they tell it back to you to kind of get that level of confidence in what's going on. And I got 5 simple questions I tend to weave into the sermon, into the class, into the home Bible study. That's like kind of a general principle for me on like whether it's a workbook or my own work, I'm going to do those things. Let me offer one more thing to participants in a congregational teaching program, is to add this. Step 1, go visit the teachers of the classes underneath the age bracket you're going to teach and ask them what a typical class looks like, all the way down to the baby class, the infant class, the toddler class. You're going to find from those teachers who have typically been promoted to younger and younger classes, you're going to find at that point that they do a lot more storytelling than most men do in a Bible class. And so you're going to be fitting into the already defined educational model for these students. And by the way, short form video, these 2-3 minute videos, that's a story form educational model. Where they may bluntly tell them the expectations, or they may allow you to assume the expectations. And so doing that downward survey in age should raise the quality of your class upward, because you're going to find out that some of those teachers are fabulous. And you're going to learn from them and take their expertise to your table. Like Kenny was saying, you've got to be the one who teaches the student. Your role there is to really make sure that you're educating, you're instructing, you're equipping, you're guiding, and you can draw that out. You can draw it out with a story. You can draw it out with a question and waiting. In balance, this one thing, and all of us need to get better at this, even if we think we're good at it. How much prodding and pushing you put on an individual. Remember, you're treating them all to a certain degree as if they were your own child, but they're not. And so you're going to find a way to move into their emotional space where they're comfortable with you being there, so you can pull them a little further down the road, or push them, or draw them, whatever is necessary for the moment. I think that's something that's super important that we don't always do very well without some level of training. Like everything else, we get trained. Get training and teaching, and especially go to the best teachers you can find, congregational context. And usually they are women who teach pre-middle school and middle school.
By the way, like if you're that guy that says, well, I don't want to lecture, but nobody comments, stand there awkwardly sometimes until somebody does. Like nothing wrong with that, because eventually somebody will be like, this is weird, I'll talk. Like it. Yeah. Believe it or not, that does work. You mentioned that the best teachers are women that teach pre-middle school or pre-middle school, and I agree. I'll say this. I think one of the things that's really important for churches to think about today is actually trying to train their teachers a little bit, to offer help to their teachers, and to mentor teachers. You see somebody, I mean, there should be a little bit of an evaluation. If somebody has a heart to teach, but they're not quite where you should be yet, pair them off with somebody that's a really strong teacher and help them work together and mentor teachers. Find some guys that will come in, or ladies that will come in and talk about teaching and how to do that. My wife's a school teacher, and she does hours upon hours of professional development to remain qualified to teach kids in a public school system. And if you're like me, the majority of us were raised in churches that did no development of their teachers. They just found people with a pulse. And sometimes, I mean, Phil, we've all been there. Some churches, that's about all you can do sometimes. But you still need to try to make an attempt to help those people with a pulse develop into good teachers somehow. And so that needs to be a concerted effort among us as leadership to not only teach the right way ourselves, but to help train people to teach the right way.
Right, and I'll plug this on a side note. There's actually good content in the Waldron book on how to teach. It's like anything else, it's contextual, and you need to make sure you give it its space. If you've got someone who is trained to teach in the public school system, they've got education that way. Maybe they have a master's degree. A lot of high school educators and middle school educators and elementary school educators have advanced education. Use them as a resource, um, and allow them to use the expertise they've developed, often at great expense and great sorrow, to make your Bible class program better.
Many tears. And some of your material comes with teachers' editions. For instance, we use Shaping Hearts for God. We use it a lot of places. And there's actually a teacher's manual for every quarter that actually has lesson plans in there that help you know how to divide things up with ideas, and even ideas for your bulletin boards. And you could even buy the bulletin board stuff that you don't have to, like, Phil, I remember when I was teaching like high school classes, the hours upon hours with an overhead projector drawing things on the wall for bulletin boards. And I would put all that in because it does matter, even in the high school class. Kids do respond to all that kind of stuff. There's some of those curriculums out there now that are good curriculum. I think Discovering God Way has some of that stuff, where, especially for your elementary age and younger, you have the material in order to like actually teach it well as a teacher. For the David Banning material, if you go to his site, getthemtalking.com, he's got videos teaching you how to teach his material. He's got his actual teacher training stuff online for free. You can go watch. So there is stuff out there for you to see to get better. And yes, that is a thing. As Hal says, it's a struggle to get people to be interested. That's where shepherds, and this is really shepherding, this is where shepherds actually need to go through and talk to their people about training them and developing them. And so I think that's important. Bob just talked about Revelation in small groups. Bob, if you're in my Revelation class, you'll learn that we don't care what the little horn means. That's the wrong way to approach that text, and that's maybe a whole other thing. But I'll just say that even the teacher, when I teach Revelation, does not get into what the little horn means. Because we, sadly, in Revelation, here's another soapbox, we don't understand Revelation because we're too busy looking at the bark and we can't see the forest. We're not even looking at trees. We're looking at the bark. We got to back way up and see the story for what it is, because it's a story, Phil. As you said earlier, that's a very important thing.
Yeah, Revelation is a series of story repeats. Basically, it's the Bible on rerun, if you want to think about it that way, to a degree, not exclusively, but and that's a normal biblical model of education. Two quick things. There's a great distinction between a Bible study and a conversation about the Bible. and that they can be good Bible studies, they can be bad Bible studies, they can be good conversations, they can be bad conversations, but there is a difference, and they each have their space. Daniel, I want to know more.
Yeah, send us some
Because
information, Daniel.
anytime, yeah, just drop that into one of our inboxes, and because I'm sure not only I'll just speak on behalf of the Christians that I know, that's something that should happen. We've got a part of our plan for next year's congregational work is to improve the abilities of our members to be Bible teachers in all settings. And so that might fit into that niche. It might not, but either way, it's something that I would love to see shared and replicated. Like it doesn't, we need more of that for all of these settings so that everyone's equipped better. Like the goal in all of this is to do more quality work while we keep the quantity the same or bigger. And I think there's some good things that can be done. So going back to one other area, we've talked about the old books. I think they have a value. I think that fill in the blank stuff works really good all the way up to that third grade block, and then you start shifting off into more interactive models because that's what they need. We've talked about some more recent workbooks. We talked about the banding stuff, which is good. And I'll double down. If you're going to use a banding book, go watch a banding video about that book, or at least some of them to get a feel of that method. The Discovering God's Way stuff is good. Most of the stuff produced right now by the large producers, and I say large in relative terms, isn't bad. It's mostly average, and some of it is excellent. Well, there's one category we didn't kind of touch on, and that's the various forms of self-directed learning. You got like the Bible Lab project. I think there's another one that's like a Bible survey thing where they've got a 4-book binder series. I can't remember the name of it right now. Our spiritual heritage kind of fits in that self-directed study, although it's kind of an addendum. It comes from that same context, and it's pretty good too. But it's kind of
our
a
spiritual
different
heritage
thing.
is more of a curriculum. The Bible labs were the kid version of self-directed study, which
Right.
is a whole nother thing we can talk
And there's another chunk of it that had individual lessons for every single day for like 4 years for all age brackets. I just can't remember the name of it. There's some good things in those series, especially in the structure they lay out of when you cover what and how it interlaces. The problem with self-directed learning comes down to the fact that it's self-directed. And there has to be the balance. One of the things that made the Bible Lab good, if not great in instances, was that it wasn't supposed to just be a kid in a box for an entire period. It was a kid in a box for part of the period. That kid in the box was interacted with a team of educators in that space. And then it was capstoned with directed learning at the end. That was designed to tie it together.
But at a majority of Bible Lab places, eventually the adult became a facilitator and you stayed in a box for 45 minutes because they didn't run the program. That goes back to the preparation and understanding the purpose. They didn't run the program the way it was designed. And you and I know of stories like that turned into that. Yeah. And the Bible Lab's greatest adaptation, by the way, Phil, let me throw this out there, was for the smaller churches that didn't have enough kids to divide up into small groups like maybe we do, where we have 8 to 15 kids in class. And you might have 1 kid in grade 1 and 2 in grade 3 and 4 in middle school. Bible Lab allowed you to put them all together in a room. And if you worked the plan, you had a period that you were all together and you had a period of self-learning. That was a great solution to those kind of issues for education. But it got abused, just like everything else has been abused. And that goes back to what we talked about the planning.
Yeah, I helped put in as part of the slave labor or leader labor Bible Lab in 2 different groups. One group, the first group probably didn't need it. The second group absolutely did. They definitely needed, because they had that disparate age bracket issue where you just didn't have a nice even flow of ages to have healthy classes at all age brackets. And so you ended up having kids too far apart in the same Bible study in age and in experience and maturity. There's a place for those too, but like these other models, the same methodology applies. You've got to get to a point where you understand the purpose. And one of the neat things is that most of the more modern material are written by living authors. I don't know if people understand this, but you can totally call those authors and they are thrilled to no end to talk your ear off about why they did what they did when they put together their material. Like, I know it doesn't happen as often as we would think it does. They're going to be just thrilled because I know what I call. They're like, okay, I'll give you 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. How much time can you give me to tell you about why I did what I did? It is, um, no, we're not going to give time for the non-planners. They should be fired. I'm answering Jeff's question with firmness. I don't know if you saw that pop up there, Terry. They don't get to defend their poor habits in this instance because, by the way, those non-planners are just alternative planners. They just set their plans with different names.
I thought we put that to bed last week. Like, I thought that we were done.
Yeah, that was last week. Why are you digging last year's trash out and serving it as a meal for today?
Yeah, let's
garbage in, garbage out. It's French.
Yeah.
Let me add a couple things before we
at
least
by
close
the way,
my end of the table. Go ahead, Terry.
Let me highlight one advantage of things that we didn't talk about. Some of these curriculums, especially for kids, and I think about Shaping Hearts for God. One of the things I love about that, I think Discovering What God's Way may do this too. Some of the more modern ones actually give a family plan for how to approach the study at home. And that's a layer we didn't talk about, but I love that. I love that. It needs follow-up, and you have to talk to the congregation about, hey, here's how this is designed. But there's some beautiful, beautiful things attached to some of the more modern curriculum about that provide you as a dad, for instance, with some daily devotional material for your family. And if the church is on a unified curriculum like Our Spiritual Heritage or Shaping Hearts for God or Discovering God's Way, where everybody's on the same thing, that provides you that opportunity to actually reinforce Bible study at home for the family. So I just want to throw that out there, that I think that's one of the great things that the material I grew up on did not have, by the way. That was not a facet of the early material fill in the blank books, but it is now, and I think that's a fantastic addition.
Right. And so last little summarization. Look, if you got fill in the blank material that the congregation has agreed to be part of your curriculum, don't just throw it out. Learn to adapt it to your space. Learn to adapt it to the context. Like Terry pointed out, maybe the adaptation is to simply use that as a teaching tool. Say, hey, let's learn how to use this software to accomplish this goal. Maybe they take that skill away. Maybe you make a game out of it. You start gamifying the questions. I'd encourage people to do some research on gamified education. It's a tool. It's not the tool. And you can gamify at any level, even up into the adult class, and kind of learn to incorporate that principle of, hey, let's use this, but let's use it well and as intended into the methodology that's best for the congregation I'm part of. Because your need will vary to the extent of the group. There are subjects that I can teach at Eastside that I could not teach at other places the way that I would. And I think Terry and I will try to get a list of some of these things post conversation, just like links to banning stuff, links to some of the other material, a couple of videos that he and I have talked about. I know we've talked about this before in other broadcasts too, Chris. Like, all this stuff is broad knowledge things, but I think there's some narrow stuff there that we can kind of hone in on. Terry, last thoughts? Any thoughts?
Just, I think one of the things that's really interesting, especially when it comes to kids classes, but this is true for adult classes, is like, in many ways, this may be the most important thing we do when we're together. I mean, the sermon is great, but you can get a lot more effectiveness out of a well-presented class that's interactive than me getting up there and preaching at you for 30 minutes. And I think that deserves all of us to put our attention into it and our effort into it, and to make it an important focal point. And over the years in the Barna studies, what people are looking for in churches, they change a lot. But one of the things that has almost always remained a constant was the Bible classes for kids part. And I just think that's one of the things you need to keep in mind. And we didn't talk about this, but in your kids' classes, the classrooms need to look presentable. They need to look like something you'd want to engage in. Your teachers need to be there early so visitors' kids aren't sitting in a room by themselves wondering if there is a teacher. I mean, all the things you expect when you take your kid to school, if your kids go to school, or if you were to take your kid to school, you need to approach that the same way with what we do. And I just think that's important. It's worth our effort and our time, and doing it well. We need to excel at everything, but this is one of those we need to really focus on.
Yeah. And these are, don't feel like, hey, I can't do all of this. What you need to be doing is one step towards the goal.
You build
and
on
hone in on being successful at that new one step. And then the next new one step will fit into the next space, and the next one, and the next one. And you'll develop the efficiency to get to the finish line quicker. And you realize that your finish line is a lot farther away than you thought it was. Like, you've actually gone a lot farther in these incremental steps. That's it for our conversation today. We want to thank you for jumping in, and all of the extra participation was awesome. And we're glad to take some of this extra knowledge too, and profit from as well. Daniel, I'm looking forward to seeing what you send off to us in regards to those teacher programs. And Chris, we'll try to put together a short buzz list of, hey, these are 4 or 5 really good starting places to get some additional insight. I'll throw out some from the Baker Academic series. And today's session went very taco, because you can pretty much put taco in most blanks and end up with an excellent outcome.
It is Taco
Thanks,
Tuesday.
everyone. Take care. It is. And have a great day.